join us? I think he can hear me. Here he is.
Yes.
Good morning. Good morning to you. Hugh, we have just finished our AGM, and just to let you know that this AGM we had the most people attending, and I know very clearly it's not because of the AGM, Hugh, it's because you are our guest speaker. We all decided that was the reason why most people have come to hear the AGM, but most importantly, they've come to listen, got to share with us today. So I'm sure you know this man. How many people don't know the famous Hugh Mackay? Not one hand went up, Hugh. They all know you. So I'd like to do an official welcome to you. So thank you for doing the presentation today. And I'll just share with you some of Hugh's amazing achievements over his career. Hugh is an AO. He's a social psychologist and the best-selling author. You know how many books he's written? Come on, have a guess. What do you think? 23, very close. He's an author of 22 books, including 8 novels. His latest book, which some of you may have, The Kindness Revolution, was published last year in 2021. He's had a 60-year career in social research and also a weekly newspaper columnist for over 25 years. He is currently an honorary professor in the Research School of Psychology at ANU in Canberra, and he's a patron of the Asylum Seekers Centre. Among other honorary appointments, he has been Deputy Chairman of the Australian Council for the Arts. He's the inaugural Chairman of the ACT Government's Community Inclusion Board and an honorary professor at Macquarie, Wollongong and Charles Sturt University, where I got to know Hugh even in more detail, I guess, or got to know him better. He's been with me on the board of COTA Australia for 3 years as an independent director and standing down this year. Hugh is a fellow of the Australian Psychological Society and the Royal Society of New South Wales. In recognition of his pioneering work in social research, he has been awarded an honorary doctorate by 5 Australian universities, and he was appointed the Officer of the Order of Australia in 2015. It gives me great pleasure to invite you, Hugh, to deliver your presentation, and it's entitled Kindness, the Antidote to Loneliness. Thanks, Hugh.
Thank you very much, Joan. It's a great pleasure to be working with you and to be the follow-on act for your AGM. I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but at least courtesy of the miracle of Zoom, we're kind of together. A survey published by the Australian Psychological Society and Swinburne University in 2019, in other words, before the pandemic hit, reported that 25% of Australian adults, this is a dark figure, 25% of Australian adults feel lonely most of the time. So in our session together, I want to talk about the health hazards of loneliness and also about the healing power of kindness. But to begin, I want to say something that's so blindingly self-evident, you'll wonder why I'm even bothering to say it. But I do believe that it's helpful when we're talking about a subject like loneliness, or when we're talking about any aspect of human experience, human behaviour. We should begin by reminding ourselves of what it means to be human. Can we take just a moment to reflect on that? Because we humans, like many other creatures on planet Earth, we humans are members of a social species. And what that means is, at the deepest level of our being, we need each other. We're hopeless in isolation. We need families, neighbourhoods, friendship circles, workplace colleagues, groups, communities of all kinds to nurture us and sustain us. And because we belong to a social species, to give us that all-important sense of belonging, which is so fundamental to the mental and emotional health of a member of any social species, including ours.
Hugh, can I just interrupt? Sorry,
Yes.
we're just having trouble hearing, and we can't turn it up from our end anymore. We've got on 100%, so probably two options, maybe talking a little louder.
Yep, I'll get a little closer.
A bit closer, yes.
How is that? Is that any better?
Where's the sound coming from here? So you asking. Sorry, Hugh, it's just Megan. We'll try and get the microphone closer to the computer. Just trying to work out where the sound's coming from. So you keep talking and I'll try to work that out.
Okay. Yes, I was saying that the sense of belonging is fundamental to the mental and emotional health of members of a social species. Is that any better, Megan?
Little bit. I'll just check. You keep going and I'll try to work it out.
Okay. Well, I hope you can hope you can catch what I'm saying. For that reason, I think it's fair to say that the human project is to create and maintain social harmony. That's what our species needs in order to survive, let alone to thrive. And the good news about all this comes to us from neuroscientists, who, of course, these days can peep into the human brain in ways that psychologists and philosophers could previously only speculate about. And neuroscientists tell us that they can find the cooperative center in the human brain. In other words, we are hardwired to be social creatures. We have an innate capacity to cooperate. That's not surprising, is it? If we've evolved as a social species, you'd expect that we would be hardwired to cooperate. But it also means that the qualities we need to cooperate are also innate. We have an innate capacity for kindness, because kindness is the crucial ingredient in cooperation, an innate capacity to show respect towards each other, to show compassion, because those are the essential qualities we need if we're to fulfill our destiny as a cooperative species. Well, I've said kindness a few times, and it's in the title of my talk, but I haven't defined it, and you might think we all know what kindness is. You don't have to define kindness. It comes, of course, from an old-fashioned, much longer word, loving kindness, a beautiful word. But these days we don't have time for words as long as loving kindness, so we've chopped it down to kindness. But what is it? In order to define kindness and to understand why it's such a therapeutic aspect of human behavior, all we need to do is remind ourselves again of what it means to say that we're members of a social species. Because we're members of a social species, because we have this deep, deep need for a sense of belonging, our deepest psychological need is to be taken seriously, to be acknowledged, to be noticed, to be appreciated, to be included. So I would define kindness as anything we do that conveys to another person that we take them seriously. Anything we do or say that conveys to another person that we have noticed them, that we've acknowledged them, that we're including them, that we're taking them seriously. When I say anything we do, I literally mean that. It could be just a wave or a smile as you pass a total stranger in the street. I heard a very disturbing story just a few weeks ago about a young man who'd attempted to take his own life by jumping off a bridge, and he survived the attempt. And he said to his rescuer, "If someone had smiled at me, I wouldn't have jumped." Just ponder that. The moment when you just greet a total stranger, when you acknowledge someone standing with you at the bus stop or wherever, that might be a point in their lives when they are on the brink of despair, and just your friendliness, just your act of kindness can be the thing that brings them back from the brink. So it can be as simple as that. It can be buying someone a cup of coffee or sharing a meal or offering someone a bed for a night, helping a frail elderly person on or off a bus or across a busy street. In some ways, the most potent act of kindness we ever perform is the one that you're performing right now, and I appreciate it. And that is, you're listening to me. Listening is one of the most therapeutic acts of kindness, one of the most therapeutic gifts we can give each other. Because just think about what you are implying, what you're conveying without having to put it into words. When you listen attentively and empathically to someone, you're saying, without having to say it, I take you seriously enough to bother listening to what you have to say. I might not agree with a single thing you're saying. I might not like the direction this is going, but I'm not even entitled to disagree with you until I've heard you out, until I've actually taken on board what you've said, until I've entertained your ideas. That's what listening says. I'll entertain your ideas, even if I hate them, even if I'm going to attack them kindly. If you doubt the power of listening, just think about what happens when you don't listen attentively and empathically to someone who wants you to listen. What you're conveying, again, without having to put it into words, is, sorry, I don't take you seriously enough to bother listening to what you have to say. I don't acknowledge you sufficiently to even entertain your ideas. Now, would you ever say that to a partner or a colleague or a friend or a neighbour or a child? No. It'd be too hurtful, it'd be too offensive. And yet that's what we are saying whenever we withhold the gift of listening. So listening is therapeutic. All acts of kindness are therapeutic. Every act of kindness helps to make the world a better place. And that's why I'd say that our capacity for kindness is the greatest asset that we cooperative creatures that we are, that we humans possess. We don't always value it as much as we should. We often push it aside in favor of ego-driven impulses like competitiveness or acquisitiveness or jealousy or all sorts of other things that can distract us from our capacity for kindness, but it's always there. It's remarkable, it's wonderful, but it's not heroic, it's not exceptional, it's humans being human. Think of kindness as being a bit like breathing. You can't flourish physically if you don't keep breathing, and we'll never flourish emotionally and psychologically if we don't commit ourselves to kindness as a way of life, as simply a way of being in the world. I think of kindness as being a unique form of human love. Back to that longer version, loving kindness. All forms of human love are wonderful, of course. Romantic love is exciting and energizing, and familial love is powerful. Companionate love, where would we be without the love of our friends? All of those forms of love are wonderful. They're all to do with affection, with liking people. And when we use love more generally, when we say, I love chocolate, I love dogs, I love this book, we're talking about affection, aren't we? We're talking about an emotional response, something that we like. What's unique about kindness and our capacity for kindness is that it's completely independent of our emotions. If there's only one thing you take away from our little session together this morning, I hope it would be this thing, that kindness has got nothing to do with our emotions. Kindness has got nothing to do with liking people. As a species, and I think this is worth celebrating, every day we should reflect on this. What a great species to belong to. This capacity for kindness means we are capable of being kind to people we don't like. Samuel Johnson, 250 years ago, very wisely wrote, kindness is in our power, even when fondness is not. I think we should write that down, stick it up on the fridge. Kindness is in our power, even when fondness is not. We're capable of being kind to people we could never agree with, about religion or politics or culture or whatever it might be. We're capable of being kind to total strangers. Isn't that a wonderful quality that our species possesses? So it's nothing to do with affection, and we don't qualify people in order to show kindness to them. You don't see someone pouring with rain and someone's shopping bag has just burst and their shopping's gone all over the footpath, and you see they need a bit of kindness. Unless you're a very strange person, you don't say, I see you're in a bit of strife there. Now, before I offer to give you a hand, there are just a couple of check questions I have to, like, how did you vote in the last election? Now, do you believe that Jesus rose bodily from the dead? I mean, there are just a few things I've got a few boxes I need to tick before I can decide whether I'll be. Of course, we don't do that, do we? Human person, kindness. It should be, and for most of us, most of the time it is, an automatic response to any kind of encounter with another member of our species. I'm not talking about a soft option. I'm not talking about agreeing with everyone all the time. I'm not talking about being a doormat. I'm not talking about being acquiescent. I'm talking about approaching every encounter, even the difficult ones, even the ones that involve disciplining a child or firing an employee or terminating a relationship, always approaching it in the sense of, in the spirit of the kindness that is required to participate in this great human project of building social harmony. Okay, let me pause there just for a moment. By the way, can you hear me all right now? Is it?
Sorry, Hugh, one interesting thing is that the people out there who've joined us online can hear you remarkably well. So the Zoom is working well, and I think I got mostly a nod from people here. So
Oh,
yes.
good. Okay. Well, I'll keep semi-shouting.
Okay, keep shouting. Thank you.
And I apologise to the people online. Turn me down. Anyway, pause there for a moment. That's my little attempt at describing what it means to be human. You could say of us humans, we are born to connect, we're born to congregate, we're born to communicate. That's the kind of species we are. Now, with all that in mind, just think about what's been happening to our society over the last 30 or 40 years. Not just Australia, but around the Western world. But let's just think specifically about Australia. Anything I'm going to say about Australia in the next few minutes, you could apply to most of the societies we compare ourselves with. But we've been through, in this last, well, really this last half century, but especially the last 30 or 40 years, we've been through a period of unprecedented, that's a word we've got used to, isn't it, over the last couple of years, unprecedented social and cultural and economic and demographic and technological upheaval, change, disruption, producing a number of social trends which have had the remarkable effect cumulatively of pushing us in precisely the opposite direction from what I've been describing as our essential human nature. Far from being a period of increased social cohesion, far from being a period in which we've enhanced people's sense of belonging, far from being a period in which we've become more socially aware, more conscious of the truth about us, which is that we all exist in a kind of shimmering, vibrating web of interconnectedness and interdependence. Far from all that, it's been a period of increased social fragmentation, or what the sociologists describe as atomization. Let me very quickly, and I will be quick with this, I'm conscious of the time and those uneaten sandwiches waiting for you, but let me just mention 5 or 6 of the most significant trends which have been producing the effect that I've just spoken about. You'll see how in their various ways, all of them point in the direction of the increased risk of loneliness and help to explain that extraordinary, alarming figure about the 25% of adults who feel lonely most of the time. Let me begin with what I think is the single most significant social change in our way of life over the last 50 years. Actually been happening for 100 years, but accelerating over the last 50 years. We hardly ever talk about it, but it's absolutely fundamental to how our society has been changing, and that's our shrinking households. Over the last 100 years, Australia's population has increased fivefold. The number of dwellings in Australia has increased tenfold. So we've been creating households at twice the rate we've been growing the population, ergo, household shrink. The average Australian household is now 2.5 people, heading, the Bureau of Statistics tells us, for an average of 2.2. If you think of household types as single person, two person, three person, etc., as separate categories, the biggest single category is single person households. They account for already more than 25% of Australian households. And the Bureau of Statistics says if these trends continue, within the next 10 or 15 years, every third household in Australia will contain just one person. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment, and I'm sure many of you live alone or have been through periods in your life when you have been living alone. I'm not suggesting for a moment that everyone who lives alone feels as if they're socially fragmented and isolated and lonely and so on. There are many people who've chosen to live alone, love it, see it as a symbol of their freedom and their independence. They can socialize as much as they like with family, friends, colleagues, and then they can come home and shut the door and punch the air and say, alone at last, I love it. Yes, there are people like that. And they enjoy their solitude because they have rich social interactions when they go out. But there are many people who don't feel like that at all, who live alone involuntarily because of bereavement or relationship breakdown or relocation to a new part of the country for a job, say, where they don't know anyone. And people who are involuntary solo householders typically don't say how much they love it. They typically say how difficult it is, particularly those who've experienced divorce late in life or bereavement, talk about the ache that never goes away. They talk about how they'll turn on the television set and a couple of lights before they go out. So when they come home, they won't have that awful aching, yawning feeling of coming home to an empty house. It's a particular problem among elderly people. 1/3 of Australian women over the age of 65 live alone. 1 in 5 Australian men over the age of 65 live alone. Now, again, I emphasize, I'm not saying that everyone who lives alone is lonely. What I am saying is, in a society where we're heading for every third household containing just one person, the risk of loneliness is, of course, greatly increased. Let me quickly run through a few other trends and then we'll wrap this up with some observations about what this all means for us. Our rate of relationship breakdown has increased dramatically in the last 30 or 40 years. Between 35 and 40% of contemporary marriages will end in divorce. And incidentally, among the elderly in the over 65 age group, there is a rising rate of what is now called grey divorce, as many baby boomers in particular coming later in life and living in a society in which there's no stigma about divorce, decide they've grown apart, there's no reason to stick together. And so the over 65 divorce rate has been steadily increasing. Well, all these relationship breakdowns, of course, contribute to social fragmentation. It means a two-person household, for example, becomes, at least for a while, two single-person households. It means there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of anguish, there's a lot of disruption. Friendship circles can be fractured, family circles can be disrupted. If children are involved, then of course the disruption is correspondingly greater, and children often are involved. There are 1 million dependent kids in Australia living with just one of their natural parents today. While I'm talking about kids, I'd mention another trend, not so significant in the older age group, but it's worth remembering as part of our social context. I'm talking about the falling birth rate. It's fallen again in the last 12 months. Those of you who are baby boomers were born at a time when the birth rate was 3.6 babies per woman. The birth rate today is 1.6 babies per woman and falling. Why do I mention that? Well, any of you who are parents will know that if you move into a new neighbourhood and you have young children, it's often the kids who get to know the other kids, and social networks are established typically by beginning in the playground or on the school bus and so on. Kids act as a sort of social lubricant. Well, at a time when in our history, relative to total population, we're producing the smallest generation of children Australia has ever produced, that means that social lubricant is in shorter supply than ever before. We know how we're compensating, of course. We're acquiring pets. There are now more pets than humans in Australia, 25 million of us, 28 million of them. And dogs in particular, we know, are child substitutes for many people simply because of the names they're given. I recently met a dog called Ian, and I thought that was quite a funny name for a dog, but then someone told me they'd called their dog Hugh. So I think child substitutes is what we're talking about. Anyway, so that's another factor. Our increased mobility is another factor. We're moving house on average once every 6 years, just like Americans. And of course, we're more mobile in the sense that we have almost universal car ownership. Most of us live in drive-in, drive-out suburbs where you wave at your neighbour's car, assuming your neighbour is driving. It's not the same as stopping and saying good day on the footpath. Our busyness, notice how busy we all are, how proud we are of how busy we are. We even greet ourselves by saying, how are you going, Joan? Busy? As though, come on, are you busy or are you dead? The switch has got to be on or off. Well, busyness is the great enemy of social cohesion. Busyness can be a great barrier between us and others. The neighbours are having drinks on Friday night. Sorry, too busy. Don't disturb Dad, he's busy. People in retirement are so often saying, I'm so busy, I don't know how I ever found time to go to work. Why? This is an opportunity not to be so busy. This is an opportunity to devote more time to the social interaction that is so fundamental to our mental health, rather than retreating into a cocoon or staying in a cocoon of busyness that insulates you from other people. And the final thing I'll mention quickly on this list is the information technology revolution. It's a paradox, isn't it? It allows us to do things like this. We can connect like this. We're more connected than ever in our history, but of course it also has made it possible for us to stay apart from each other more easily than ever in our history. And the people who are trading off face-to-face contact in favour of screen-based contact are suffering. The loneliest group in Australian society is not the elderly. The loneliest age group in Australian society is the 18 to 24-year-olds, who are the heaviest users of social media, who are connected more or less 24/7, yet who report the highest levels of loneliness in our society. And that's because they're experiencing something that Dr. Michelle Lim from Swinburne University, the author of that research I mentioned, describes as social hunger. When we don't get enough social interaction, when we don't get enough eye contact, neuroscientists tell us, we do experience a vague uneasiness. So it can lead to cranky, just like when you get physically hungry and you get a bit cranky. You can even get angry before lunch. And then you have lunch and suddenly the world seems like a lovely place, and those people who were so irritating are not so irritating after all. Pathetic, isn't it, how a full tummy helps? Well, it's the same with social hunger. If we're not getting our daily dose of social interaction, particularly involving eye contact, face-to-face social interaction, then we suffer. the consequences of social hunger. So what are the consequences? Because social hunger is a consequence of all the things I've been talking about. The consequences are very obvious. I've mentioned that we've become what social analysts around the Western world now describe as more socially fragmented, an erosion of social cohesion, the rise of a preoccupation with personal identity, the me culture, everyone obsessed about how they're different, how they're unique, not how we're the same, not how we share a common humanity, but how my position on the gender spectrum or my ethnicity or my religious or political convictions makes me different and special. All those things are important and fascinating to individuals, but not nearly as significant as the fundamental truth that we share a common humanity. So that rise of the me culture, I think, is a kind of symptom of our social hunger. It's a symptom of the fact that we have become a more socially fragmented society. And you know what happens to herd animals like us when we're cut off from the herd? We suffer. And at the moment in Australia and around the Western world, we are suffering 3 epidemics, quite apart from COVID. We're suffering an epidemic of loneliness. I've mentioned the figure. We're suffering an epidemic of anxiety. We're suffering an epidemic of depression. Those things are all connected fundamentally to the problem of social fragmentation. Loneliness, in particular, we should think of as a disease because there are so many health hazards associated with loneliness, not just anxiety and depression, which are very commonly linked to loneliness, but also hypertension, inflammation, sleeplessness, vulnerability to addiction. There are lots of other health consequences that flow from that. In our criminal justice system, solitary confinement is the worst punishment we can think of for a prisoner because that is the worst punishment you can inflict on someone who belongs to a social species. So let's pause again. First, I talked about what it means to be human. Now I've talked about some massive social changes which have been, in a way, challenging our very humanity, creating a way of life, and by the way, not imposed on us. No one said these things had to happen. We've made the decisions, we've made the choices that have led to these social trends. We're all part of the trends, but the consequences have been dire for us in terms of the epidemic of loneliness and its consequences. So now to bring this to a close, let's move into the third stage of what I want to say and think about our more recent history. Think about the fires of 2019, 2020. Think about the COVID pandemic of 2020 right through to the present. Think about the floods, which are truly unprecedented in many parts of Australia right now. What has all this done to us? The answer is it's done what crises and catastrophes always do to human societies. Awful, challenging, producing hardship, deprivation, in the case of COVID, serious illness and death, and the people are still dying today from COVID. Terrible. And yet, when we face a crisis, when we face a catastrophe, it always reminds us of what it means to be human. It reminds us, without us having to think consciously about it at all, of all those things I said at the beginning of this presentation. It reminds us that we must cooperate in order to survive. It reminds us that we must be kind to each other. It reminds us that we must show respect towards other people, that we must be prepared to make individual sacrifices for the common good. And we just do all that when there's a flood. We do all that when there's a pandemic or a fire or a depression or a war or some other catastrophe that's challenging us. The big question, of course, and it is a big question, it's an urgent question for us now in Australia, is has COVID, plus the fires, plus the floods, been enough of a shock, been enough of a reminder of what it means to be human to mitigate the effects of those trends? Are we going to recognise that those trends have been pushing us away from our true humanity, and shocked by these various crises, are we going to say, okay, now I've been reminded of what it means to be human, let me hang on to that. Let me keep acting in the way I did at the height of the crisis. There's some discouraging research published just yesterday suggesting that we might be already letting that go. The sense of social cohesion in Australia rose greatly during the height of the pandemic and has fallen again in the last 6 months. The sense of belonging rose dramatically during the pandemic and has fallen again in the last 6 months. Are we going to be so pathetic, so feeble, so thoughtless that we're going to try and put all this behind us and go back to being the rampant individualists that we were becoming before we had to face these crises cooperatively? I hope not. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we hung on to these lessons and internalised them, even generalised to affect our national agenda? What a big impact it would have on our national agenda if we adopted kindness as the criterion against which we're going to judge any social or economic policy. What an impact it would have on the process of reconciliation with the people of our First Nations. What an effect it would have on our care of the frail elderly in our society if kindness was our driving motivation. What an effect it would have on the way we treat people coming here seeking asylum. What an effect it would have on our attempts to eradicate poverty and homelessness, or to take more urgent action on climate change in the interests of the generations who are going to follow. What an impact it would have on the way we deal with and respond to people struggling with mental illness, disabilities, or other debilitating conditions. Well, enough about the big picture. Let's talk about us and our particular concerns in COTA. Knowing what we know about the crucial importance of social interaction, eye contact, the daily dose to satisfy social hunger, and knowing what we know about the health hazards that follow from social fragmentation, social hunger, and loneliness, there's a powerful message, isn't there, for those of us who are not lonely, to be more alert to those who are, or who are at risk of loneliness, to be reaching out to people who are living alone and who are at risk of not just of social isolation, but of loneliness. We became more alert to all of that, didn't we? During lockdowns, we realized there were people who experienced social isolation or the risk of it all the time. And perhaps we hadn't been attentive enough to that person at the end of the street who lives alone and we don't see much of him or her, or the person in our apartment block who doesn't appear very often, and maybe we should have been knocking on their door, and we did during the pandemic. There was a great increase in neighbourliness. Let's not let that go. And more generally, let's keep dreaming of the kind of society that we become when we have to face a crisis. Let's recognise that a society edging towards loneliness as a larger and larger, in fact, I'd say right now, loneliness is the #1 public health issue in Australia. We know how to overcome it. We know we need to become a kinder, more compassionate, more cooperative, more respectful, more inclusive kind of society. We can do that. But it just involves each of us individually deciding that we're going to live as if it is that kind of society, to be more alert to the problem of loneliness that so many people are facing, and to take on board as a personal responsibility the need to address it. Thank you, Joan.
Hugh, I've heard you speak many times, and always amazed at your, I suppose, your depth of observation of people, individuals, and communities over time. And we all here recognise how much you've influenced the social conversation that we have about these important issues. Hugh, what we're going to do now is I'm going to take questions from the floor and people who are out there, but we can also see up on the screen fantastic insights and inspiring content. Would it be possible to obtain a transcript? Yes, folks, this is being recorded, so we'll have it up on our website. But Hugh, I'd like to start, I'll ask you a question that's been puzzling me. A person who does believe, of course, in the importance of kindness. And, you know, this morning coming here on the ferry in Sydney, I always make a point of thanking the staff on the ferries. And as soon as you say, thanks, mate, or they'll come back to you and say, have a great day, love, you know, or whatever it might be. So it's that interaction. I don't know whether that's a good example of kindness, but it's like when you do give kindness to people, often people will come back with some comment or a smile. And I think that's important to do many, many times each day of our lives. But in my presentation today, on my President's report, I did talk about the whole problem that we've got with the fragility of our democracies, and about how hard it is now to encourage the systems that we interact with. So whether that's government or health, whatever systems we interact with regularly, you know, how do we get that, to kickstart them to come back to those values of kindness and inclusion? Because that is one of the problems. We can do individual things and we will all continue to do that. But when the systems we interact with don't show the same values, then I think that's an issue. So I'd like your comment on that.
Yes, thanks, Joan. And by the way, keep thanking the ferry staff because the point you make is absolutely right. The ripples of kindness go out. When we act kindly towards someone, we have increased the probability that they're going to act kindly towards someone. It doesn't matter if they don't act kindly towards us, but the ripples will go out. Yes, look, the whole problem of systems, bureaucracies, institutions, organisations is a huge problem because, of course, institutions of various kinds, whether we're talking about a public service structure or a bank or a church or an employer organisation, whatever it might be, we create those institutions as a kind of scaffolding to help hold our society together, to serve the interests of the community, to nurture the cooperative instinct, to promote kindness, generosity, compassion, mutual respect, all that kind of stuff. And when we see signs that these organisations have started to become more interested in their own systems, their own internal processes, their own hierarchies, serving their own ends, rather than responding to the needs of a wounded and troubled society, we naturally become very cynical about those organisations. One of the reasons why people have become cynical about politics is because for so long they've felt that political leaders or politicians in general were only listening to them at election time and didn't seem to be there to serve the needs of a society, not even perhaps to understand the needs of a troubled society. So all I can say, Joan, really is let's keep talking about the problem and let's keep, I mean, dealing with a bureaucrat is exactly the same as dealing with the person who's wheeling the gangplank onto your ferry this morning. If you model kindness, if you continue to behave generously and courteously and respectfully, the impact, and if all of us do, the impact will gradually accumulate. It's a tough call. I mean, it's a major challenge, but all we can do is keep discussing the problem and modeling the good behaviour.
Okay, thanks, Hugh. Now, what I'm going to do is take questions from the floor and I'll translate them the best that I can. So people who are asking questions, if you could just say your name and keep the questions short, and then I'll try and do the best to translate them to Hugh. Sarah.
My name is Sarah Brad. Thank you for that report. I thought it was wonderful. I'd like to know how important you think authenticity is in kindness.
Did you hear that, Hugh?
How important authenticity is in kindness? Yes, yes. There are a lot of concepts that hang together very closely, and authenticity is one of them, because authenticity and integrity and kindness and compassion, I mean, all of these things are part of a flourishing human being. If we are inauthentic in our presentation, if we're not being true to who we are, then that is very quickly perceived by other people. So even acts of kindness can then seem to be hollow or inauthentic or manipulative, as though, oh, well, you know, you're just being kind because you want something, or you're trying to project yourself as a person different from the person I know you really are, all that sort of stuff. Authenticity leads to integrity, and kindness is at its most effective, of course, when it comes from a place of authenticity. It's a really important point.
Thank you.
Don't mock kindness, like mock listening. You know, people can see through mock listening very easily. You're pretending to listen. Well, in a way, that's even more insulting than not even pretending to listen. And mock kindness looks like manipulation rather than an expression of our genuine humanity.
Hugh, I think one of the important things you also said in your presentation, and I've heard you say this before, but I wonder whether the audience was amazed at this, about the younger generation having that whole issue of what did you call it? Social hunger.
Social hunger, yes.
Social hunger, yes.
Yes.
And
When you look at the behaviour of people on social media, and we hear all about it, don't we? Trolling and bullying and abuse that goes on social media. That is almost certainly due to the fact that the heaviest users of social media are socially deprived. They think they're connected, but they're only connected via a screen. And they're experiencing social hunger, which is, they don't even know where their own anger comes from, but that's where it comes from.
Very interesting that. So I think if we've got younger children and grandchildren, that whole notion of just being able to get them to switch off, you know, we do need to switch off from screens. Just on the ferry this morning, there is not one person, in a sense, one person had a mask on. There was not one person there interacting with each other. You know, it was like you get on your phone, you do your business, whatever you need to, and then you walk off and you're still on it. You know, I just sort of think, hello, there is a time when we need to turn that stuff off, and a time to actually talk to each other. And as Hugh said, engage effectively and lovingly with each other. We've got another question. Yes, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Hugh. Another great talk from you. Stephen Ginsford. Two questions, if I may. One, the Great Britain, so-called Great Britain, has a Minister for Loneliness. Should we lobby as COTA for a Minister for Kindness in Australia?
Yes,
Did you hear that question, Hugh?
this is about the UK Minister for Loneliness. Yes, who resigned not long after being appointed, and I'm not sure that they've appointed another one.
They have.
They have?
They have.
Oh, right. Yeah, I think that is precisely the wrong approach. I think if we say that the problem, I mean, I'm saying loneliness is our number one public health issue at the moment. You may think, well, why don't we appoint a Minister for Loneliness then? But loneliness is our problem, and loneliness is a street by street problem. This is to do with humans being human. It's to do with us accepting our responsibility to reach out, as Joan said on the ferry, to reach out and say good day to someone, especially if someone's looking a bit blue or a bit isolated or troubled. But even if they're not, just to make the connection, say good morning. If they don't want to talk, that's fine, but they might. This is I mean, maybe a Minister for Loneliness can encourage all of this, but I don't think that it's government responsibility to address the problem of loneliness. I think it is our responsibility. Local government plays a significant role, of course, in the way they create, and state governments contribute to this, of course, as well, the way they create the kind of infrastructure, urban and suburban infrastructure that facilitates incidental, accidental social interactions that makes it more likely we'll bump into each other and say good day. New developments in some outer suburbs that don't even have footpaths are a disgrace, because that's capitulating to the motor car and saying, well, we're not going to act like neighbours anymore. We're going to come and go by car. We're not going to wander up and down the street. Outrageous. So there is a role, obviously, in infrastructure terms for creating places for us to live and work and move and shop that will encourage social interaction. But I fear if we talk about appointing a minister for loneliness, like appointing a minister for kindness, it would be a bit like saying, well, let the government worry about this. Whereas I'm very keen that we should accept this as part of the responsibility we bear simply by having been born into the human species. It's a tough gig being human. We can't just please ourselves. We do need to make sacrifices in the interests of other people's well-being. All that sort of stuff goes with the territory.
Can I ask one more question?
One more question, Hugh, from Stephen.
Just a tip for anyone out there who feels lonely and is isolated because they live alone and may not be able to move around.
Did you hear the question?
No, I'm sorry, I couldn't catch
some
that.
tips for people who are out there who are feeling alone and isolated and not getting out. Have you got a few ideas about how their lives could change in the positive way?
Yes, thank you for that. The first point I'd make is just a reiteration of something I've already said. It's our responsibility rather than theirs. The people who are experiencing loneliness are the victims of choices we've all made about how we're going to live. Now we're not going to stop these trends that I was talking about, but it's a bit like planting trees to offset carbon emissions. What are we going to do to offset the effects of those trends? And one of the things we're going to do is be far more alert in our street or our apartment block to people at risk of social isolation, and we're going to reach out. We're going to knock on the door and say, I don't want to interfere, but my name's Hugh, I live over the road, we've never met. Here's a bag of lemons from my tree. Here's my number, give us a shout. I might just pop in every few days, see how you're getting on. That's what we've got to be doing. But if people are looking for one of the problems about loneliness, like one of the problems about anxiety and depression, that trio of pandemics all have the same problem, that people do become very inward. Once people are feeling socially isolated, they become more and more reluctant to reach out. Loneliness feeds on loneliness. It's a very unfortunate human phenomenon. Once you sort of cut off, it becomes harder for people to spontaneously rejoin the herd. But that's certainly what's required. I mean, our message to people who are feeling lonely, who are feeling socially isolated, is do whatever you can to get connected. Walk into the neighbour's place and say, look, I'm actually feeling a bit blue, I'm on my own, would you come and have a cup of tea with me? Reach out to someone else, anyone. Any form of social interaction. Strike up a conversation with the person next to you on the bus. Join a choir, join a book club, join a discussion group. Anything at all that will connect you to other people will have an almost miraculous effect on that aching sense of loneliness that you're experiencing.
Hugh, we've got another question online, and we've got another question also from the audience here. Can you read the question from Myra Hamilton, who happens to be a board director of COTA New South Wales?
No, I can't see it.
Oh, so she's saying, Hugh, do you think there is a danger that focusing on interpersonal acts of kindness moves attention away from the importance of the welfare state's role in impersonal, transfers of support to those in need.
Mm.
At the crudest stage, a person in destitution or without a home may appreciate a smile on the street, but we don't want to lose sight of the importance of the state in funding programs to support a safe home in a safe community, social infrastructure, access to transport to facilitate connection, programs facilitating social interaction such as centre-based daycare services for older people and carers, etc. Should continuing taxes to support these things be considered in an important act of kindness? You can see why she's on our board, can't you?
Yeah, 3 cheers for those sentiments. I agree 100%, and I'm not for a fleeting instant am I suggesting that the individual responsibility to reach out, show acts of kindness, connect with people at risk of social isolation and so on, should in any way absolve the state from its responsibility to its citizens. We tend to look to Scandinavia for shining examples of how to tackle this. And I personally do look to Scandinavia. I mean, the problem of homelessness in Australia is a disgrace. The fact that well over 100,000 Australians tonight have nowhere to call home is a disgrace. And that's a responsibility. We can't individually solve that responsibility except someone we know. We might offer them a bed for a night or two. Yeah, we ought to be paying far higher taxes in order to eradicate homelessness, certainly. Finland has effectively eradicated homelessness. If someone is homeless, they give them a home. They don't say, oh, what are the problems that caused your homelessness? We better work on those problems. They say, you can't hope to work on those problems until you have secure housing. So we'll give you secure housing for as long as you need it. And then it's not just a matter of giving you a roof over your head. We'll also give you the social support you need, the professional support you need in order to address the problems that led to your homelessness. We could do that. That could become that's why I said when I spoke towards the end of my remarks about how a commitment to kindness as the hallmark of our society would have a dramatic effect on social and economic policy. And things like homelessness and poverty are two examples of how, I mean, governments are always talking about cutting taxes, as though we are so insensitive to the needs of people on the margins, people who are suffering disability, poverty, homeless, that we don't care about that, just cut my taxes. Well, I'm waiting for the brave politician who says, we got all that wrong. We need to increase taxes. We need to be far more generous to people on the margins. We need to talk much more seriously about the redistribution of wealth. And so it's going to be a different world, but that's how we'll bring our society into a more humane, kinder, more compassionate, more inclusive, more egalitarian, more equitable kind of future. So I totally agree. You can't have one without the other. Being kind to each other in the street is crucial to the mental health of the people we're kind to, but that's only half the story, as you say.
Thanks, Hugh. Another question from here. Did someone have their hand up? No, I know. I think just when you were making that comment in regards to Myra's question, one thing I observed this week with the floods, Hugh, as you know, that are happening again in parts of New South Wales, and families are devastated, and you see those individual acts of kindness, and then you see the politicians streaming in trying to do the best they can. And one example, which I thought was just like, if I was a person, you know, the federal government announced $1,000 to all of the people who'd lost their homes, you know, and I thought, well, couldn't you just make that $10,000? You know, what is $1,000 really in regards to that? Some of these people have lost their homes for the second time. Some of them do want to come back, others won't come back to that community where they've lived most of their lives. So I think some of those symbols of what some people would think is the government trying to do the right thing, just doesn't hit it sometimes. So we had a bit of a discussion this morning about we need to kickstart a lot of the things that we've grown up with that we think are important for cohesive societies. So anyone want to make one last comment? I think they're all eager to digest, Hugh, what you've said and to put some things in action. But I do know a lot of the people here in the room with me today and those people who are joining us online, that they do lots of individual acts of kindness every day, because that's the COTA way and that's the COTA world. So in closing, Hugh, I'd just like to thank you again. I do hope that you're going to have a good summer season, however you're going to celebrate that with your wife and with your family. I don't know whether you're going to be moving from Canberra, but if you are, travel safely. And I look forward to seeing you again very soon. And we wish you all the very best, and a big thank you from the two audiences.
Thank you very much, Jane. Thank you.
All right, folks. Well, how did you enjoy that? Yeah, it was he's a very impressive speaker, isn't he? He has got a lot of things to suggest and a lot of new ideas. So that's the end of the AGM and of course Hugh's presentation, but from me and from all the people at COTA, I do wish you all the best, whichever way you celebrate the summer season. I hope that the rains go away a little bit, and for those people who are really struggling in New South Wales because of floods, we send them all our very best. Now, make sure, taking on what Hugh said, make sure you have a few laughs. That's important, as well as kindness, I think. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others around you. And I hope you can share some great joy, because we certainly need it. Happy Christmas, everyone. Sandwiches, cup of tea. Good. Water. I even managed to do it.